Then this is a beautiful diagram from one of the textbooks you study. I will not discuss the whole diagram, but I will concentrate on the outer layers of this. Now you can see the skull here. Now this is the skull bone. Now my focus is the tissues, soft tissues outside the skull here, which you call scalp. So this is like the skin and the soft tissues of the head outside the bone, skull bone. So this is a fairly thick area. Now if you compare with the thickness of the bone here, this is the thickness of the bone, and this is the thickness of the skin and the underlying soft tissues. It's almost like double according to this picture. So so when you hit the head against a hard surface, because of the hard surface on one side and the hard skull on the other side, the skin and the soft tissues in this area can split. So that is what you see in a head injury. ඔළුව පැලුණා කියලා අපි කියන්නේ. It's not the skull that breaks, it's the soft tissues over the skull that breaks when you say ඔළුව පැලුණා or something like that. So remember this point. It is important to know about these soft tissues that are outside the skull. As a shortened form, you call them scalp. SCALP. So in that direction, I have put scalp. S means skin. S means skin, and C is for connective tissues, and A is for aponeurosis. L is for loose connective tissues, and P is for periosteum or the pericranium in this case. Periosteum is a general term for all the bones. When it comes to the skull, you call it pericranium. So these 5 layers will form the area called scalp. So when you say scalp, skin is also part of it. So the scalp lacerations that I was talking about before, if you hit the head against hard surface, you can get scalp lacerations which you will have to suture. Otherwise, there will be a lot of bleeding. You call it profuse bleeding because there is a good blood supply to the scalp with a lot of anastomosis between many arteries. So if somebody asks you why there is profuse bleeding in scalp lacerations, one reason is there is a very good blood supply, very rich blood supply to the scalp with a lot of anastomosis. You can name the anastomosis, you can name the arteries later when you learn the details about the names of the arteries and all. For the moment, you can't say that. But there are other points that I need to stress here. The purpose of this lecture is not going into details, but since there is no separate lecture for scalp, I will discuss this because questions are asked from this area. Now you can see a lot of blood vessels here. You see blood vessels here, one. So these are all branches from different arteries that supply the scalp. I already said between these arteries there are a lot of anastomosis. Now these blood vessels, you can see they lie in the connective tissue layer. So they lie in the connective tissue layer, and there are a lot of fibrous bands, collagen fibers in the connective tissue layer. They bind these arteries, the wall of the arteries all around. So these arteries are bound outside by the fibrous bands or fibrous tissue, and if the arteries are broken due to a scalp laceration, it's difficult for the arteries to constrict. Usually when a blood vessel is cut like that, it constricts and becomes smaller. So that's part of the cessation of stoppage of bleeding. You call it hemostasis. I think you have learned it in hemostasis. So part of it is forming a blood clot, and part of it is the constriction, becoming blood vessel, the diameter of the cut edge of the blood vessel, cut end of the blood vessel becoming smaller. So that is prevented by this fibrous tissue attachments. So So remember this point if somebody asks you why profuse bleeding. So it's rich blood supply with good anastomosis, and then prevention of constriction of the blood vessels due to, because the blood vessels are in the connective tissue layer and there are fibrous bands attached to the fibrous tissue attached around the blood vessels. So there's another point. You can see this aponeurotic layer underneath the connective tissue layer. Now this aponeurotic layer is something like this. Now there are two muscles. Now there's a muscle attached to the frontal. Now you have the skull like this. Your orbit is here. Now this is the frontal bone here. Now there's a muscle here which is called frontalis muscle. You can contract it when you frown. You contract this frontalis muscle, and your skull is like this. You have the occipital bone here, and there's another muscle here called occipitalis muscle. Now this attaching these two muscles, there is a flat tendon like that. So this tendon, flat tendon, is the one that is called aponeurosis here. Okay, so that is actually a flat tendon like the aponeurosis of the abdomen. You have seen the aponeurosis of the abdominal muscles, which are again flat tendons. So here you have these two muscles on either side, this side and that side, and this aponeurosis connecting up the two muscles. Actually, you call these two muscles occipitofrontalis muscle as a single muscle, you can call them. So both get the nerve supply from the facial nerve from two different types of branches. That's the same main facial nerve that supplies both bellies of the muscles. Now then the point here is you have the aponeurosis here, this layer, and underneath that you have this L, loose connective tissue layer. So the moment you have a layer like this and attached on either side like this, and you have a very loose connective tissue layer, if there's bleeding under that layer, blood can easily spread underneath the aponeurosis. Now if you hit the head of a person, it might not lacerate like in the previous example I gave you. It might not lacerate, but there can be contusion. Thelma. There can be contusions. So in a contusion, what happens is there's bleeding inside the skin and the soft tissues. So if there is a blow to the head like that, and if there is a contusion with bleeding underneath the aponeurosis, between the aponeurosis and the periosteum, pericranium, bleeding in this area, in the loose areolar tissue area underneath the aponeurosis, then this blood can, as I said before, go in either direction. Now what happens is if it goes in the forward direction to your frontal area, the blood can actually seep through the muscle attachments and can get collected inside your eye. So that is called black eye. So you see this blood around the eye as a black staining under the skin. So a blow on the head can actually give rise to black eye. You don't have to hit the eye directly to cause the black eye. You can just hit the forehead or even behind that. And if you sleep with in the prone position, the blood can seep down into the eyes due to the gravity. So remember this point also. Then the other point is sometimes you get this avulsion injuries of the scalp. Avulsion means the whole thing comes out. Now, especially females who work with machines, rotating machines, if they have long hair, if the hair gets entangled in a rotating machine, the whole scalp can come out in this loose areolar tissue area that is just underneath the aponeurosis, because the rest of it can easily come out in this layer. Okay, breaking the loose areolar tissue, the rest of it will come out with the aponeurosis underneath. So you call it degloving injury. So avulsion of the skin. So then so that's another point that you need to remember. Then there is another point. Now the periosteum or the pericranium, the last one, which is this layer. So that is part of the skull bone, and that is firmly attached to the suture line. So there are firm attachments at these points. Now you know different suture lines in the skull. You have the sagittal suture, coronal suture, lambdoid suture, and all these sutures. At the suture lines, these the pericranium is firmly attached to the suture line. If you go back, if there is bleeding underneath the pericranium, therefore, since the pericranium is firmly attached to the suture line, the blood clot will be limited to that area, not like bleeding under the aponeurosis, where the blood can spread from one end to the other end. In this case, blood will be limited to the suture lines. So if you bleed under the temporal bone, bleeding will be limited there. If you bleed somewhere here, parietal bone, then again it will be limited by these suture lines into that area. So this is commonly seen in newborn babies, because during the delivery, if there is obstruction of delivery, you apply vacuums. Sometimes you apply a vacuum like this, and suck to pull the head out of the birth canal. So during that process, the pericranium can get slightly separated out with the scalp. It might not totally come out, but you can get bleeding in that layer. So these are limited to these suture lines. Remember that point. So someone can ask you to explain the anatomical basis of this limitation. Okay, that is because the pericranium is attached to the suture lines. Okay, simple. Then okay, the rest of it, now I will not discuss the rest of the things here, because you have the meninges in this picture, you have the brain here, and the blood vessels in certain spaces that you see inside the cranial cavity. All these things we will wait and we will discuss later. You know, if you take, because this diagram is a very nice diagram which has a lot of information. So I will limit the discussion on this at this point. But just one more point before I move further. You can see these veins in the scalp, in the connective tissue layer, in that layer I'm referring to. You see these veins, superficial veins of the scalp. You can see this vein is connected up with the dural venous sinuses. So this is how you get the venous arrangement inside the cranial cavity. They are in the form of dural venous sinuses. They are in the form of venous sinuses. And you can see the superficial vein in the scalp is connected up with the venous sinus, in this case the sagittal sinus, with the vein passing through the skull bone, and such veins are called emissary veins. Okay, so these veins can be a source of spread of infection from the scalp into the cranial cavity. So you can get infections spreading from the scalp area into the this dural venous sinuses, which can cause problems. So there are other connections between deep veins, venous sinuses, and superficial veins, and spread of infections. There are clinical points. You will learn these things when you move on with your course.